Hello, Unshaken Saints. Welcome back. I'm Jared Halverson. And first of all, I want to thank you for all the feedback you're giving us. As we've shifted things over from my wife's little office at home to this beautiful facility that Faith Matters has put together, we're adjusting lighting and sound and all the setup, and your feedback has been invaluable. So thank you for weighing in with options and opinions and everything else. Keep that coming, and we can continue to make adjustments as time goes on. I also want to thank you, especially you parents, that have loaned me some of your children or grandchildren at BYU. We just finished the semester there. I got to meet several of you who came to visit your kids and sat in on class, and you're amazing. Your children and grandchildren are amazing. And so I'm just grateful for the chance to be able to study such incredible truth as found in Scripture with such incredible people. And the same is true for us here. I'm so grateful that you would come and spend your time with me studying Scripture. And this week, we've got some fascinating Scripture to study. Sadly, it's often lost in the shuffle in the book of Mosiah, because you get King Benjamin. We spent 2 weeks with him, and he deserves every second. And then next week, we'll get Abinadi. And to go from King Benjamin to Abinadi, I mean, talk about an incredible 1-2 punch. But they are interrupted by 4 little chapters, Mosiah 7, 8, 9, 10, that often get overlooked. And that's sad. What we're going to be doing this week, it's not the famous storylines, it's not the incredible sermons, but there is some connective tissue that's going to take us from King Benjamin to flash us back so we can meet Abinadi next week. We're going to be covering these 4 chapters, like I said, and each one of them has some gems that I really wanted to mine with you. Chapter 7, we're going to be spending some time with the parable of the prodigal son, living it. We're going to talk about Hansen's Law. I'll explain what that is in just a second. In chapter 8, we're going to wrestle with seers and seer stones, the translation of ancient manuscripts through the gift and power of God. And then in chapter 9, we're going to wrestle with a contrary that is at the heart of a lot of the religious and political divisions we see in our day. The way it's spelled out here in the book of Mosiah is one of the best examples of it I've ever seen in Scripture. So stick around for that. And then in chapter 10, depending on how much time we have, I can sum that one up in 2 words. And yet those 2 words describe the core issue that is at the rift between Nephites and Lamanites. And there's some issues there that we need to wrestle with in our day as well. So we've got some amazing things ahead, and I'm looking forward to diving in. Now, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we started Mosiah that Mosiah is a tricky book to study because there are 2 different areas. We've got one group in the land of Zarahemla and another group in the land of Lehi-Nephi, and there are 3 generations going on. So if we needed to chart this is how it would look. In the land of Zarahemla, we get the more famous people of King Mosiah I, King Benjamin, and King Mosiah II. Meanwhile, in the land of Lehi-Nephi, also shortened to just the land of Nephi, you get Zeneph and Noah and Limhi. And those 2 sides are going on simultaneously over these 3 generations. And today, last week we were off in Zarahemla, okay? In a couple of weeks we'll get back to Zarahemla. But for the next few weeks we are going to be spending our time in the land of Nephi with this subgroup that's split out. And we'll see where they're coming from later on today. Now, when you have 3 generations like this is what dawned on me, I think 4 years ago when we filmed this the first time. It dawned on me that with 3 generations, Hansen's Law is a perfect way to look at this. There was a guy named Marcus Hansen. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning American historian in the early 20th century, and his specialty was immigration history. And what was fascinating for him was to see what happens when immigrants move to a new country. Okay, let's picture they come from the old world, the old country, and they come here to the United States. The first generation is struggling to fit in, to make the adjustment from past to present or from old to new. They speak in a foreign language, and now they're trying to learn new things and new cultures. It's a difficult thing. I'm so amazed by immigrants and the courage that they have to be able to come to a new place and start over. Well, the next generation, so that's the first generation. Second generation struggles not with the new place, but with the parents that are still so tied to the old place. The struggle for them is, we were born in the United States, for example. English is our first language outside the home, though we're basically native speakers of the mother tongue at home. But the difference between that is often a struggle for them because they want to fit in the environment, outside the home environment. They want to fit in at school. They are grateful they don't have their parents' accent, and they are a little bit ashamed in some ways of their parents or of their cultural heritage. And so they distance it as much as possible. And then the third generation looks back at grandma and grandpa and sees that they missed something since then. There's a certain bit of cultural nostalgia and wanting to tap into some of those family traditions from before. It's almost like grandma and grandpa were too far on one extreme. Mom and dad were too far on the opposite extreme. And here I am trying to prove contraries, trying to find balance and live in this new country as an American, but also hold on to the cultural values and traditional approaches that were of benefit in the old country. It's really fascinating to see those three. To give you a quick chart on this that might help you see it, let's look at first generation, second generation, third generation. And the first, it's all about immigration. The second, it's assimilation. And the third is nostalgia. In the first generation, it's all about preservation. Second generation is rejection, sadly. And the third generation is this desire for return. In the first generation, you have an identity tied to the old country. Second generation, it's this counter-identity. I'm trying to reject what came before. And then the third generation is this return to a cultural heritage where it's this beautiful fusion of the old and the new. Now, I actually chuckled that it was a guy named Hansen that figured this out. Because as one who has a Scandinavian last name myself, Halvorson, if you have a son, S-O-N or S-E-N at the end of your last name, you're probably of Scandinavian ancestry. And that son the technical term is patronymics. If you want to bring that up in casual conversation, go impress somebody. Patronymics means your last name has the name of your father in it, okay? And so at some point in my ancestry, there was some Viking out there named Halvor, and his son got a last name that was Halvor's son. His daughters would have been Halvor's daughter until they got married and then took on a new name themselves. And this Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, Hansen, means that somewhere in his ancestry there was a father named Hans who had a son who then became Hans' son. But here's where it gets interesting, and it couples with this three-generation idea with Hansen's law. That often a father will take the name of their father and name their son after him. A chance to pay homage to their father and just keep on the family name, okay? What's interesting, though, with Scandinavian names, do you know any Hansens? It's a very common name. Do you know any Jensens? Very common name. And you know why? In Scandinavia, Hans and Jens are very common first names. But imagine if I'm this historian and my last name is Hansen. Well, if we went back in time, that means my father's name was Hans, and so now I'm Hansen. Imagine if my first name were Jens. Okay? Now, my father is Hans, I'm Jens Hansen, but my son is going to be a Jensen since that's my first name, Jens. But if I want to name him after my father, then he's going to be Hans Jensen, even though I was Jens Hansen. And if fathers and sons keep doing this over generation, the names are just going to flip-flop back and forth. And it'll go from Jens Hansen to Hans Jensen and Jens Hansen and Hans Jensen. And it makes family history interesting if you're of Scandinavian descent. Well, again, this idea of three generations, and the third generation wants to go back closer to the first generation. What's interesting about that in terms of our own life in the church is you start to see, especially if someone is raised on one side of a pendulum and their children overcorrect it, then their children will tend to correct back to things the way they were in the first. The simplest way to define Hansen's law, by the way, is this phrase: what the son wishes to forget, the grandson wishes to remember. Now take that in terms of faith loss, which is what I study all the time. And I think there is a spiritual equivalent of Hansen's law, that if a family was very strong in the church, but then they have a child that pushes back against perhaps some of the extremism, if that existed in the first generation. They felt a little too closed off from other perspectives. And so they correct and unfortunately overcorrect and end up leaving the church, for example. It's interesting to watch the next generation those grandchildren that look back to faithful, active grandparents and wonder if they missed something in the previous generation of why didn't my parents pass down what was given to them? This spiritual nostalgia, if you want to call it that. I think it's interesting also to see in this the possibility of creation, fall, atonement with the stages of faith that we often talk about. And in creation stage, that first generation, next generation in a fall stage, followed by the next generation after that tries to return everything to where they were, but in a better way. They learned some values from grandma and grandpa, though there are some cons with those pros. They learned some different values from parents, though there are some pros with those cons as well. And then they are trying to fuse them, trying to prove the contraries and balance both sides of things. And so it's that third generation, we hope, that leads things to an atonement stage. One other way to look at this, and then we're going to dive into the text, is the parable of the prodigal son. If you were to act out that parable in 3 acts, Act 1 is this son of righteous father leaving the home and going off to the far country. Act 2 is life in the far country as he is descending and beginning to struggle and lose the inheritance and begin to come to himself. Well, that's what leads to Act 3. And Act 3 is the return trip as he's trying to decide, how will I be accepted there? And what will life be like when I return? Those 3 acts are what we'll see in these 3 generations, especially in the land of Nephi. I'm fascinated that there are 2 different civilizations going on, 2 different cultures, 2 different family trees. And one tells the story of a group who stayed, and the other tells the story of a group who strayed. And to see the difference between these 2, what happens over time. I think the most obvious foil dichotomy here is King Benjamin in one place and King Noah in the other. If you could pick which king to be led by, that's an easy one. And next week when we spend our time with King Noah, that's going to become crystal clear. The choice that the first generation makes really does divide things and what's going to happen moving forward from there. But if we think about this in terms of zenith, in that Act 1, I leave and start over somewhere else. Then Act 2 of the prodigal son is King Noah. He's out there living it up in the far country and losing the father's inheritance. And then later it is Limhi, generation 3, Act 3, starting to wonder, what was life like back home for my grandpa? What would it be like to return to where we left 2 generations ago? I've never been to Zarahemla, but I've heard of it. And it sounds like the kind of place I'd like to go. So departure, what happens there, and then return. That's what we're going to see over the next several weeks in our study. And this one, we actually see beginning and ending because we're going to have a flashback. Okay? You with me on this? As we're starting to see some overarching goals here. Because as we dive into chapter 7, keep an eye out for 2 issues. And this is actually a scripture study skill that I hope will be a blessing to you, that in your study, if you can figure out an overarching theme in a given chapter or set of chapters, and then start highlighting words and phrases that help move the lesson forward on that theme, it's a great approach for your own study or in your teaching in gospel doctrine or family home evening or seminary, wherever it might be. The overarching theme I want us to look at, particularly in chapters 7 and 8 today, is the question of what gets us into certain messes, and then how can we get out of them? What leads us away from God, and then how do we come to ourselves and come back home? Again, lessons for the prodigal son. And I think if we have eyes to see it, the way I'm going to do this in chapter 7 is almost going to be rapid fire. Okay? If you want a more expanded version of this, I'll link this video to the one from 4 years before. But the idea here is, let me give you a phrase from chapter 7, for example, and then hint at some of the insight that you might get as you wrestle with this and try to coax out some meaning, okay? And again, what we're looking for is 1, what gets us into certain spiritual messes? And number 2, how might we emerge from them and return back to the God that we've left? Now, first verse for this is chapter 7, verse 1. And notice the phrase, desirous to know. What ends up happening here, King Benjamin's speech is behind us. There's a period of peace. Benjamin's son Mosiah the second. Yep, Benjamin named his son after his father. How's that for the Hanson's Law, right? But what we're seeing is these people are asking King Mosiah, 2 generations ago, there was a group under some guy named Zen, if I remember correctly, and he left Zarahemla to go back in search of the old country, back to the land of Nephi, where we first settled. And we haven't heard anything about them for 2 generations. We are desirous to know concerning them. And if we're looking for lessons here, think about those that you know once were in the church and no longer are. Are you desirous to know what became of them? Are you desirous to know the story behind their departure? Because if we don't find that out, if we don't find out where they are, we're very unlikely to ever be able to help them return. And so it starts with that. Whatever happened to that old mission companion of mine? Wonder how they're doing. I wonder what happened to those friends I had in that previous ward, the people I served with, the people I taught. Do we keep close enough tabs? Well, I'll put it this way. Gossip is the counterfeit for whatever it is we're talking about in this verse. Gossip is desiring to know in a negative way, talking behind somebody's back. But this positive version of being honestly and sincerely, selflessly interested in people that once worshiped with us and no longer do, for whatever reason. That's the issue. Do we know the reason? And are we desirous to know it? What's interesting is also in verse 1, there's this phrase, they had heard nothing. Again, 2 generations have passed, and whatever became of them, we haven't heard a thing. And I have found, as I work with people in faith crisis, as I work with people that have left the church for whatever reason, is that often the moment they decide to leave, conversation on that topic is now forbidden. Now that can come from either party. There are those that have left and don't want to talk about it. And then there are those who have stayed but don't want to talk about whatever reason was the person had for leaving in the first place. And often those are good reasons from their own experience. The choice to depart made sense to them. It was their better option as far as they were concerned. And I worry sometimes that we hear nothing because we ask nothing. We're too nervous about what's going to happen. And until we can become safe conversation partners, and number 1, desire to know, and then 2, allow them to speak and tell their story. Encourage them to, in a non-judgmental, non-confrontational way. I say this to people all the time. Please come and tell me your story. I am interested in you as a human being, as a fellow traveler on the path of life, even if it's not the covenant path for you at this moment. I'm not going to be judgmental. I don't want to get defensive or offensive, but I sincerely desire to know your story. And I want you to be able to share it. Otherwise, I would hear nothing, and therefore I can help in nothing. So will you tell me? Will you share? I have heard from several who have left the church that say it's hard sometimes to spend your life growing up talking about church things all the time. And then all of a sudden, that's the forbidden topic of conversation. And if being a part of the church was something worth discussing with people, then wouldn't the decision to leave it be worth discussing with people as well? If I can simply do so in a way where I'm not attacked or villainized or vilified for my decision, I think there's a lot of room for improvement on our part to be able to have the kinds of conversations where we can validate people's difficult experiences. We can empathize with the hard emotions that have come as a result. We will probably have to agree to disagree when all is said and done, but to maintain relationships so that conversations around the Thanksgiving dinner table can be more positive, instead of fraught with the kind of tension and animosity that often exists there, okay? There's one other phrase in verse 1 that I think is worth wrestling with. It says that they wearied King Mosiah with their teasings. I'm not going to take the time here to unpack that one. Now, that one you can go back to the 4-year-old video, or you can look up what teasing really means. At least some alternate definitions in today's dictionary as well as the 1828 dictionary, which would help you see what was in Joseph's mind when he chose that word for the translation. It's not our kind of teasing. It's a different one. So if you're curious, check that out. But look at verse 2. There's another phrase here because Mosiah decides, okay, fine, let's go after them. Let's go in search for them. Let's inquire. And he sends strong men. Interesting adjective. And they go out to inquire concerning their brethren. They're the ones that are willing and courageous enough to engage in these kinds of conversations. And I'll admit, it can take courage. Sometimes there are those on the staying side that say, I don't want to ask questions about why they left because they probably have questions I can't answer. And I get that. There are times if you're a lifeguard that you have to know, am I healthy enough to dive in the water to try to save someone who's struggling? Because if they're stronger than I am, then there could be two drowning victims. If I'm stronger than them, than they are, then we'll both make it back to shore. So am I strong enough, again, take that word and wrestle with it. Am I strong enough to go in search of those that are struggling? Am I strong enough to inquire after them? These men were. The problem is verse 4. How about this phrase? They knew not the course they should travel. Sound like our reactivation efforts? Sound like a parent who's just tearing their hair out, wondering, how do I help that child whose path is different than mine or different from other children? Do we know what to do? So often we don't. And yet we can borrow a phrase from Nephi here. I was led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand the things that I should do. And if we can be strong and courageous and inspired, then go inquire. Ask them to share their story. Open your heart and mind to their experience, and you'll be amazed at what both parties can learn from one another. What's interesting about this one also, that same verse, verse 4, not only did they not know the course, but as a result, for 40 days they wandered. And sometimes it feels like that too. And I'm just wandering with this child that I can't understand where they're coming from, and they can't understand where I'm coming from. I'm wandering, and I'm struggling to know what to do to help someone. Well, the fact it was a 40-day wandering, that number should give us some hints. Because the number 40 in Scripture is often so symbolic for a period of purification and preparation. 40 days and 40 nights of rain for the flood. 40 years of wandering in the wilderness before they were purified and prepared to enter the promised land. Moses' 40-day fast, Elijah's 40-day fast, Christ's 40-day fast, the 40-day ministry. I mean, there's so many examples of these 40s. And so to me, the text is hinting at us, you want to go in search of people that are struggling? You want to go and take a journey of understanding someone that's different from you? Then prepare yourself and purify yourself. Purify your motives, purify your emotions, prepare yourself so that you can be a safe conversation partner, no matter what they choose to do based on the conversation that results. Okay? It might take us more than 40 days, but symbolically, it's worth that preparation. Well, verse 7, Ammon is the name of the man who's leading this group of the strong. Okay? This is not the Ammon that chops off arms. We'll have to wait for that in the book of Alma. But this other Ammon, a descendant of Zarahemla himself, goes off in search, is found by them, but ends up being taken and bound and committed to prison. That's verse 7. And yeah, brace yourself. They might not be as purified and prepared as you've tried to be. Maybe it's all those earlier conversations where we hadn't done our 40 days of prep, and so they're a little bit gun-shy about us bringing up gospel topics, okay? So prepare yourself for some opposition, for some difficulty. The process of crying repentance or opening our heart or just bridging gaps is a difficult thing, and it may be a challenge from the start. But what's interesting is once King Limhi, this is third generation, by the way, okay? It's been 2 generations since they left. But King Limhi is there in the land of Nephi. He meets this guy, I don't know who he is, but somehow he came into our land, uninvited, unannounced. Who are these people? So of course I'm going to bind them and throw them in prison. But when he brings them out, he asks an interesting question. This is verse 10. I desire to know the cause whereby ye were so bold as to come. And it's interesting to be shocked, to have your curiosity piqued. Like, why would you come to me? Why would you be interested in hearing my story? I'm not a part of your church anymore. Or, Mom, Dad, why are you bringing this stuff up now? And to ask the cause for that, I think is interesting. No wonder we needed our 40 days of preparation and purification. Because if the cause we're after is self-vindication, if the cause is to try to shame them back into a return, if the cause is more of a project, nobody wants to be a project. And so to see your boldness, it better not be overbearing, by the way, right? Be bold, but not overbearing. Be courageous, but not overzealous. And to be able to just come with the dukes down and open. And I've got an open mind, an open heart, an open ear. I just want to hear your story. And that boldness with pure motives, they are going to wonder about the cause. If we can honestly, sincerely reassure them, my cause is simply the worth of souls. And if souls is too religious a term, it's simply that I care about you, I love you, you are a human being with a story that is worth sharing. And if I can simply pay you the respect of being open to hear that story, no matter, I don't have a preconceived idea of where it's going to lead. I think that's one thing that people are grateful for when they sit down with me and we're just wrestling with issues one-on-one, is I'm okay with wherever it goes. And my cause is to hear them out. I've often said, if you just need a good pair of shins to kick, I have too. If you've left and you're just looking for closure, but you want somebody that you can ask your questions or wrestle with your concerns or just vent, I feel like we owe that to you. I talked with an ex-bishop who had left the church, and one of the first things I said to him was, thank you for the service you rendered to a people that you no longer claim as your own. You left, it's not that you just left the church, you left the church better when you were here serving. And I don't want to take any of that away from you just because you no longer worship alongside us. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to validate what I can. I'd love to understand where you're coming from. I'd love to make the church that you left a better place for those who stay and for those who put their toe in the water hesitantly, nervously, wondering if there might be a way or a reason to return. Those are all things that I hope we can do and do better. We've got a cause after all. What's interesting about this is Ammon's response. I love this. This is verse 13. Ammon says to this, can you picture the tension going on? It's like you threw me into prison and just hesitantly brought me out because you're curious, okay? But the way Ammon responds to Limhi's question, I love. He says, if ye had known me, ye would not have suffered that I should have worn these bands. For I am Ammon. I know that means nothing to you, but I am a descendant of Zarahemla. And with that word, can you picture Limhi's ears perking up? Like, wait, Zerah? I don't know how many Zarahemlas there are. I only know of one. I've never been there, but I heard my grandpa talk about it. That's where you're from? In fact, Ammon says, I have come up out of the land of Zarahemla to inquire concerning our brethren, whom Zenith brought up out of that land. Now, can you picture this? The moment of recognition and realization. To hear, you mentioned the name of a city I've never been to, but I've always thought about and heard of. And then you drop the name, and that's my grandpa. And you picture Ammon like, oh yeah, I grew up with stories about your grandpa. Our people have been so curious and confused, like what became of them? What became of you? Because here I am. You're exactly the person I've been searching for. And the realization comes to Limhi, and you're the exact person I've been searching for too. This is the third round in Hansen's Law. This is the return of the prodigal son. This is what the story of the prodigal son should have been if the older brother were more like his father. To picture the older brother, what's become of my younger brother? Where did he go? How far is that far country? Is he happy there? Is he unhappy? Is he glad he left? Does he wish he could return? And imagine if the older brother went in search of him, because that's what Ammon is doing. Ammon is going out in search of a brother. That's what he calls them. We went to inquire concerning our brethren. Brothers and sisters we've never known, but brothers and sisters still. And the realization on both parts is so incredible. Limhi recognizes it as well and agrees. And talk about a quick emotional 180 from fear to absolute rejoicing. From throw you into prison to maybe you can help us get out of our prison. The way Limhi says it in verse 14, now I know of a surety that my brethren who were in the land of Zarahemla are yet alive. What's amazing to me is that both parties consider each other brothers and sisters. It's still that way. And again, to go back, I honestly wonder how many people who are far away from God, far away from the church, far away from the gospel, still hold some kind of emotional, mental, spiritual, familial, some kind of connection to it, and still sense a brotherhood or sisterhood down deep. There's a part of me, by the way, to go back to the phrase that Ammon used in 13, if only you'd known me, you'd know my motives were pure. You'd know that I came in search of you, and you would have rejoiced in my coming. There would have been no prison time to start. And honestly, I think one of the most important things we can do as we inquire after our brethren, as we purify our motives in our 40 days, as we go and become strong enough to go ask questions of people and allow them to tell their stories, is we've got to know each other. Not too recently, I guess it's been a year or two. I had done a fireside and some people who had left the church and are angry about certain things the church is and does, decided to take that fireside and then turn it into a play-by-play analysis. And they attacked me for a couple hours online. And in my opinion, mischaracterized what I was trying to do in that fireside and made it look the worst case scenario and said some strong things. And the comment section was filled with people just swearing at me and calling me names and everything else. That's fine. I'm great. I understand where people are coming from. I get it. And so if I'm the whipping boy, I'm content to be that. But it was interesting to hear one of these, to watch it. I'm open to it. I studied this stuff myself. It was kind of interesting to come full circle. Like I study those who attack the church and now they're studying me. Okay. But what was interesting is to reach out to the person who did it and decide, you know what? If ye had known me, you would have known I'm trying to understand you, not dismiss you. I'm trying to build bridges, not put up walls. We ended up getting together for like a 3-hour lunch and got to know each other by the end. And to be able to share experiences and why I feel the way I do about the gospel and why they feel the way they do about the church. And tell me the process. And when did you decide to leave? And when did God become a casualty? When did Jesus become a casualty? When did you decide to go on the offensive? Why did you choose that particular rhetorical approach? It was a fascinating, eye-opening experience for me as one who studies this, but it wasn't just academic, it was personal. And to be able to understand better what they've been through and why they approach the church in the way that they do. But if you had known me, and if I had known you, we still might disagree when all is said and done. But there can be human understanding. There can be agree to disagree, all of that, but it's got to start somewhere. And may it start with us. May we build those kinds of bridges. Well, what's interesting about the conversation that then ensues, and I'm just going to highlight a few things that take us through the rest of chapter 7. Limhi starts to tell Ammon his story. And this is where we've been for these last several generations. Ammon's going to return the favor. We'll see more of that in chapter 8. But what's interesting about this is Limhi's first hope is escape with the help of Ammon. You're from Zarahemla. We've been searching for Zarahemla. We want to get back to Zarahemla. This is the prodigal son that's not deciding to return, but wishing he could, but doesn't know the way. And so we've been praying for you, and here you are. But what's interesting about his perspective, he says, if you can just help us escape, we are under bondage to the Lamanites. And I would rather be in bondage to the Nephites. If I'm going to have to be a slave to anyone, Let us go back with you, and we will be slaves to you. That's what he says in verse 15. He says, now, behold, our brethren will deliver us out of our bondage, or out of the hands of the Lamanites, and we will be their slaves. For it is better that we be slaves to the Nephites than to pay tribute to the king of the Lamanites. It's interesting that in his mind, those were the only two options. Bondage here or slavery there, but I'll take the latter. And to picture Ammon going, wait, what? We don't believe in slavery. You're part of us. And I honestly wonder, this was the experience of the prodigal son as well. I'll go home. I know I can't be my father's son anymore. I treated him as if he were dead. I asked for the inheritance before he'd passed on. And so he was dead to me. I'm sure I'm dead to him. But my father does treat the servants well. And maybe, just maybe, he'll let me at least be that. It's amazing how much he underestimated the mercy and goodness of his father, who didn't believe in that kind of slavery. I worry sometimes that people hesitate to come back to the gospel because they think they'll be second-class citizens for the rest of their lives. I'm one who left. I was the prodigal. We're all the prodigal. None of us are on the straight and narrow every step of the way. And when we can understand that and reassure people, you will not be second-class citizens. There is no slavery in the kingdom of God. So come, and it's as if you never left, except for the fact that you probably learned some amazing lessons because you did leave and because you did return. And I want to learn about them all. That will help us. The church will be better as a result of your return, but also better because of all that you've learned along the way. I know those were hard lessons, but you can consecrate those afflictions to your gain and ours if you'll just come and teach us. Come and help us. No slavery whatsoever, okay? Now from there, verse 18 through 33, the rest of this chapter, the second half of it, is this incredible discourse that King Limhi gives to his people. Kind of this pump up like, you're never going to believe who I just met. This is my new friend, Ammon, and you'll never guess where he's from. Okay? The rest of this chapter is beautiful. So in your own study, I would encourage you to go verse by verse, nice and slow, and pull out lessons from every single passage. I'm only going to show you a few of them. My favorite is the very first one, verse 18. Limhi says to his people, O ye my people, lift up your heads and be comforted. Now the irony there is nothing's changed yet. Nothing on the ground. We're still under bondage to the Lamanites. We're still paying half of all that we possess by way of tax. But things are about to change. And if they're about to change, well, our attitude can change right now. So rejoice, okay? Be comforted. For behold, the time is at hand, or is not far distant. And that's an interesting correction there. I don't know exactly, but it's closer than it was yesterday. I can actually see our way out now. So the time is at hand. It's not far distant, when we shall no longer be in subjection to our enemies. Notwithstanding our many strugglings, which have been in vain, yet I trust there remaineth an effectual struggle to be made. Now, I love that last phrase. Actually, everything King Limhi has said there. We've been fighting for this. We've been struggling to find our way to freedom, but we haven't been able to do it on our own. We got ourselves into this mess 2 generations ago. We can't get ourselves out of this mess without outside help. But the help is here. And the help is here. And so the time's at hand. It's not far distant. Everything's about to change for us. So be comforted. It's okay. But also, I'm not here to sugarcoat anything. There is an effectual struggle yet to be made. All our efforts have been in vain to this point. But don't be discouraged. Don't give up on the process. We can come home. My wife works in addiction recovery, as many of you know. And for so many of them, hope is lost. Because do you have any idea how many times I've tried to overcome my alcoholism or my drug of choice? And the challenge of addiction is all of our strugglings have been in vain. But when you start to see a way, when someone from the outside comes and offers you their assistance, their help, and their hope, when you start to feel that kind of comfort, maybe there is a way. My wife gets to see it every day as people start to make that transition. It's so beautiful. It is redemptive. And yet, there's no sugarcoating the process of recovery because there's an effectual struggle. It took time to get down this path. It's going to take time to return. Take time to build some positive momentum, some spiritual strength, to give yourself the confidence that you're not going to slip back into old habits and old ways. So brace yourself, prepare yourself, but keep hope on the horizon. There's this, to me, it's this interesting contrary. Things are going to be better. In fact, they already are. But that doesn't mean we're there yet. There is a blessing on the horizon. It's going to be a fight to get there, but it will be a winning fight. So let's move forward in faith. From there, King Limhi, again, study these on your own, but from there, King Limhi encourages the people to have faith, to trust in a God with an incredible track record of delivering people in bondage. Exodus, anyone? Right? To think about what God did for Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, what he did for Moses and the people of Israel. This is what he does. And the same God of the Old Testament is the God of our Book of Mormon. The God of the past is the God of the present, so trust in him. And he's encouraging his people to do it. Then he does an interesting thing. He accepts accountability. Even though he wasn't the one that made the first decision to leave, that was Grandpa. But I'll own that. And I'll not only own Grandpa's decision, we'll see later, I will own my father's decision, Noah, and I'll own our own decisions that have kept us here. There's something, part of the process of change, of coming to ourselves, of making the road to recovery, is admitting our part of the problem. Again, maybe that's important for the older brother as well. I've been part of the problem that drove you away and is probably making you hesitant to come back. If we'll all take accountability and responsibility, I'm sorry I didn't make the church a place worth staying. I'm sorry I wasn't kinder to you and wasn't there for you during your struggles. I'm sorry if I've acted in such a way that made you hesitant in thinking that if you came back, you'd be a slave to me. You're not. So I'll own that and apologize for it. I love that Limhi is willing to do it. But by the end of the chapter, he gives us an incredible insight into some of the things that cause these kinds of departures. It's our iniquity, he says, among other things. But there's three possible reasons, and he owns them all. It's fascinating. When I was on my mission, there was a huge inactivity problem in Puerto Rico. And I remember our mission president telling us, most people who leave the church have one of three reasons. And sometimes it's more than one. Sometimes it's all three. But typically they boil down to some faith and testimony issue. Like, I don't believe this doctrine anymore, or maybe I never did. I'm struggling with that. I have questions I can't answer. So some kind of intellectual testimony, spiritual sort of thing. Another one is sin. And that's a reality for us all. So don't blame them for everything. We've got issues of our own, right? But this idea of, I'm not living the gospel, I feel like I'm falling short, and rather than repent, it'd just be easier to leave, okay? And stop being judged by people or judged by myself. And then the third option is, I've been offended. And as long as so-and-so's the bishop, or as long as she's the Relief Society president, or the people in my ward are too judgmental or too close-minded or too stuck in the past, whatever it might be. Now, those are legitimate reasons, all. But what's interesting is King Limhi will admit them all. He'll identify them. Here's another chart for you, okay? And I'll just pull out the phrase. From verse 25, he says, if this people had not fallen into transgression. So there's the sin reason. Then verse 25 also, there arose contentions among them. Ooh, there's the offense side of things, the friction between people. And then third comes in verse 26 and 27. A prophet of the Lord have they slain. He's talking about Abinadi here, and we'll meet him next week. But a prophet have they slain because he said unto them, and then he explains the doctrine that they just couldn't accept. So there's the doctrine or testimony approach. If you take these three and look at them in a certain way, There are spiritual reasons, there's the sin. There are social reasons, there's the offense. And there are intellectual reasons, there's the doctrine or testimony side. And another way to look at that, and this was a breakthrough the Spirit was kind enough to give me years ago, because I talk about faith crisis, and then I realized, wait a minute, there's also hope crisis and charity crisis. The three cardinal Christian virtues can all take a hit, and we can struggle with all three of them. And there they are laid out with those same three basic reasons people struggle in the faith and sometimes leave it. Think about it. If someone's struggling with sin, and it's a spiritual reason, I can't bring myself to go there, that's just a crisis of hope. Because what is it that we shall hope for? Mormon asks later. We can have hope through the atonement of Jesus Christ and the power of his resurrection, that we're going to make it home. And if my sin is keeping me from that thought, then it's my hope that has taken a hit. And if I can simply have hope in the atonement, hope in the resurrection, I'm going to make it. He's not going to give up on me. So no matter how many sins I'm struggling with, no matter how deeply I'm caught in addiction, that's no reason to turn away from the solution. I'm falling short of a standard. Don't chuck the standard. Get help to live up to it. We'll see Abinadi teach that next week. The second one, contention among us, offense, that's the social side of things. And that's just a crisis of charity. Because charity suffereth long and is kind and doesn't rejoice in iniquity and thinketh no evil of their neighbor. If we have sufficient charity, that's the lubricant of love, as Elder Maxwell called it, that can help grease the gears that are grinding in our human relationships. And then that leaves the third. If it's some doctrine, if it's some testimony issue that we're struggling with, it's more intellectual there. I just don't know if I agree with it. I don't understand it. Well, then that's the crisis of faith. So whether it's faith or hope or charity that we're struggling with, whether it's spiritual or social or intellectual, there are reasons people leave, but there are reasons that people can come back and we can offer them that help. This is part of the diagnostic phase. Diagnosing the struggle, the pain, where's it coming from? And then prescribing the right kind of help accordingly. Now, I just want to end chapter 7 with the note of the third one, because it's interesting when Limhi admits, what this prophet said that brought on his own death. The irony of this is, as what he's describing as the problem is actually the solution. The doctrine that my parents' generation couldn't handle, the doctrine that Noah and his priests fought against, is the only hope we have. So listen to this. This is verse 27. He's summarizing Abinadi's teachings, which we'll learn at length next week. He said unto them that Christ was the God, the Father of all things, and said that he should take upon him the image of man, and it should be the image after which man was created in the beginning. Or in other words, he said that man was created after the image of God, and that God should come down among the children of men and take upon him flesh and blood and go forth upon the face of the earth. Now, as a Latter-day Saint, I look at this and go, and they killed him for that? I agree with all of that doctrine. I mean, that's good, solid truth. And yet what's interesting about it is that's what was so hard for Noah to hear, so hard for his wicked priests to accept. Basically, it's the doctrine that we just learned over the last 2 weeks from King Benjamin. What King Benjamin was teaching and the people were being changed by it was the very doctrine that Noah was pushing back against and refusing to accept. And as we discussed the last 2 weeks, that is the doctrine of incarnation and condescension. The fact that the Word was willing to be made flesh and dwell among us, that there was a condescending Christ. Just like in King Benjamin's example, there was a condescending king. Can you see why King Noah would balk at that? Wait, a king willing to put himself on the level of his people? Are you kidding me? A God that's willing to come down and be like us? Oh, that's beneath me, and should therefore definitely be beneath God, if there is one. You understand? There's something about that. And yet, if that's the doctrinal issue that Noah and his priests refused to accept as a possibility, that's the only hope the next generation has to come home. A condescending Christ a kind and compassionate king who sends people out in search of you, who's willing to lower himself to a level of understanding and empathizing and trying to make sense of your struggles wherever they come from. Crisis of faith, let me reassure you of the reality of these truths. Crisis of hope, let me give you hope that you can return. Crisis of charity, let me give you that gift bestowed upon all true followers of Jesus Christ. There's something beautiful about the solution that's right there in the problem, the so-called problem from a generation before. With that in mind, chapter 8, then, we're ready to share some insights here. Because in chapter 8 is really where they start comparing notes. Ammon goes through the last 3 generations and catches up Limhi, and then Limhi returns the favor. Again, this is the 2 sides of the family coming back together after two generations apart. This is the fulfillment of Hanson's law. This is the prodigal coming back and explaining everything that happened in that far country to his older brother, who's thrilled to have him back and tells him, and this is what life at home's been like. The 2 are becoming one in beautiful ways. But part of what Limhi explains, Ammon is, I wish you guys could have been there a generation ago to hear King Benjamin's address. It was life-changing. In fact, it's what prepared us to come out and search for you. Because we were probably too caught up in ourselves. But once we realized that we were unprofitable servants and beggars all, our thoughts started turning outward far enough to encompass you. We started wondering what had become of you, wondering if you were out begging somewhere for someone to come and save you, and we came running. So that's part of what you missed. And then meanwhile, Limhi is like, well, let me tell you something you missed. You came in search for us. We went in search for you. There's something powerful about that. We wanted to come back earlier. We knew we were in a rough spot, and we tried our best to come, but we got lost on the way. We couldn't be found without you coming to find us, but we did find something. And Limhi describes this expedition that went out, and instead of finding Zarahemla, they found this land of desolation. It was a ghost town. It was a ghost civilization. There was obvious evidence that a whole civilization had grown up somewhere. We worried, everything was too rusted and so ancient that we knew it couldn't have been you. It couldn't have been Zarahemla. You're still out there somewhere. But there was this civilization that was brought to its knees and completely destroyed. The people that were on the search party found 24 plates that must describe what happened to those people. And I'm dying to find out what's on them. It's written in a language I don't know. So if you know anybody who can translate things, then please let me know, because I'm dying to know what caused their destruction. Now that's interesting. Why would that be such a point of curiosity for Limhi? Well, is he staring down the barrel of destruction himself? We'll see that. The answer is yes. What was it that got these people into such a problem that they could not recover from it? Is that the path we're on? I have a feeling these 24 plates are a cautionary tale, and I'm dying to read it. So do you know anybody? Again, with a smile on his face, it's like, oh, we're everything you need, Limhi. And once we bring you back to Zarahemla, oh yes, there's someone that has the power to translate. He's our king, Mosiah II, because he's more than a king. He's more than a prophet. He's more than a revelator. He is a seer. And one of my favorite parts of chapter 8 to study is this concept of seership. What does it mean to see? And for this, we need to see seer with 3 E's, not just 2. 3 E's in a row would be odd, I'll admit. No wonder they had to drop one. But the real term here is a seer, someone who can see things that no one else can. And the way Ammon describes it, look at verse 13 of chapter 8, and this is a key text for this and for a lot of our own church history. Chapter 8, verse 13, now Ammon said unto him, I can assuredly tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records. But it's not just because he's a linguist. He's not a polyglot. It's not just that he masters the ancient tongues. No, He hath wherewith that he can look. He has some object he can look through, and with its help, he can translate all records that are of ancient date. It's a gift from God, and the things are called interpreters, and no man can look in them except he be commanded, lest he look for that which he ought not, and he should perish. And whosoever is commanded to look in them, the same is called seer. Now, I discussed this issue at length 4 years ago. So if you want a fuller version of this explanation, go back and see that one. But I'll give you at least some hints of this, because this is starting to sound a lot like the Urim and Thummim that was buried with the gold plates to help whoever discovered them to be able to translate them. This sounds a lot like the seer stone that Joseph Smith used as part of the translation process. This is a controversial issue. There's a whole Gospel Topics essay on this on the church website if you want to study it more in depth. There's whole books behind it that you can look at and try to make more sense of this historically. To just give you some hints here, it's interesting to see what the eyes of a seer will do as opposed to the eyes of a scholar, okay? That they might be looking at the same thing and seeing two very different things. I sometimes joke that if you're falling in love, a poet will describe it in one way and a doctor will describe it in another. I'll take the poet's description, thank you very much, because the doctor is just going to talk about increased heart rate and the blood rushing to the head and increased body temperature and things like that. And it's like, wow, that sounded so romantic, doc. But they're looking at it through different lenses. They have different things wherewith to see, okay? And if I'm looking at certain phenomena through a scientific lens versus looking at it through a spiritual lens, if I'm trying to see this through a Rosetta Stone, that's one thing. If I'm trying to look at it through a seer stone, that's another thing. This applies to both the translation of the Book of Mormon and an even more controversial issue, the translation of the Book of Abraham. So many people who attack the church or leave it use the Book of Abraham as their smoking gun, their silver bullets. Like, this is the evidence we need. Now I have proof that Joseph Smith didn't know what he was doing. Well, if you're trying to prove that he didn't know what he was doing as a scholar, I'll agree. He didn't need proof for that. Joseph himself was his own proof. I don't know any of these things. I'm the unlearned. Why would you bring a book to me? Remember what Isaiah talked about, what Nephi did as he wrestles with Isaiah 29? That translation effort is not going to be a scholarly project. The learned have certain things to look through, but with those tools, you'll never see what's in a sealed book. A seer has something else to look through. For us, it would be the lens of faith. For the ancient high priest of Israel, it was a Urim and Thummim. Passed down from these generations were Urim and Thummim as well. And Joseph Smith himself, as a village seer, before he realized that that was just training wheels for a far more important calling, namely prophet, seer, and revelator, he had a seer stone as well. Again, the history behind this is fascinating. I wish I had time to go through every detail. But the thought of, well, call them training wheels, if you will. I'm amazed that God is willing to condescend, not just to be like us, but to help us on our level, instead of demanding that we do things on His. And so, blind man, how about clay and spittle and water to give you sight? None of those things are actually what's causing the miracle, but it's something for you to sense that something's happening. Washing away your sins, it's not the baptismal water that does that. No, it's the grace of Christ. But if this helps you center your faith and sense that something's happening, then I'm all for it. Laying on of hands, consecrated oil, the garment, so many things. There's nothing magical about them, but they help us center our faith in the true source of power, which is God Himself. And so, seer stone, use it if that helps. Urim and Thummim, go for it. It's only in the modern sensibility that those things are concerning. As I've said before, go look at the insignia of Yale University. And what will you see on its insignia? An open book, which is the Bible. It's the only book that mattered to the founders of Yale University. And the book is open. Underneath it is this scroll in Latin that reads Lux et Veritas, which means light and truth, because that's what we're searching for. And that's what we're finding on the pages of this book that has been unsealed, opened by God. I'm looking for light and truth. And then on the book itself, we've got Latin below. We have Hebrew on the page. And the Hebrew on the open book at Yale University's insignia says Urim v'Tumim. Yeah, Urim and Thummim. Those early Puritans who established Yale University believed in the gifts of God. They believed that if you were to look for light and truth, then you would need lights and perfections to shine upon the Word of God. Urim v'Tumim means lights and perfections. Some kind of light bulb, some kind of lens, some pair of glasses that will open your eyes in perfect ways, shine divine light upon things. We've lost something. I love Yale, no offense, but we've lost something to eliminate Urim and Thummim and eliminate light and truth, and we're looking at things from scholarly lenses alone. And of course, certain books will remain sealed to us in those circumstances. I'm grateful for an unlearned Joseph Smith who was willing to open his heart to the possibility of the miraculous and open his eyes and look through the training wheels that the Lord in his condescending mercy offered him, and then translate. Now, even the word translate is interesting. In section 21 of the Doctrine and Covenants, Joseph Smith is given titles. This is the first General Conference of the Church. And Joseph Smith is sustained as an elder, an apostle, and as a prophet, seer, and fill in the blank. Now, you immediately thought, revelator. And yes, that's how we sustain the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12 today. Prophets, seers, and revelators. They're all elders. They're all apostles. They have the same titles as Joseph Smith in section 21. But in section 21, it doesn't say revelator. It uses a different term, which suggests it must be synonymous with revelation. But it was prophet, seer, and translator. And that's fascinating. It lets you know that translation is more like revelation than what we tend to acknowledge. We want translation through scholarship. God is offering translation through seership. And again, it's not Rosetta Stones, it's seer stones. What's amazing to me, by the way, is if you look at the dictionary in 1828, to define, kind of freeze frame, what did words mean in Joseph's day? If you looked up the word translate in the 1828 dictionary, yes, it describes it as changing from one language to another, but that's the 6th definition out of 7. You have to get through 5 other definitions of translate before it's even acknowledged as like, oh yeah, I guess it's also used to change languages. But how's this for the first 5? To bear, carry, or remove from one place to another. I'm talking movement. That's what you're translating. More specifically, number 2, to remove or convey to heaven. That's why we talk about translated beings. That never made sense to me before. Okay, a translated being is a being that has been removed or conveyed to heaven. Number 3, to transfer, to convey from one to another. Number 4, to cause to remove from one part of the body to another. Number 5, to change. And only then do we get number 6, to interpret, to render into another language, to express the sense of one language in the words of another. Number 7, by the way, is simply to explain. But those are later definitions. What is Joseph doing when he, quote unquote, translates the Book of Mormon by the gift and power of God? Through Urim and Thummim, through seer stone, through some miraculous training wheel that helps him see what would be impossible to see otherwise. He's moving us from earth to heaven. He is conveying heavenly truth down to earth in a miraculous way. Oh, did Joseph see on the papyri what an Egyptologist would see? Of course not. And I can totally honor an Egyptologist's translation of the papyrus. And I can completely honor the revelatory translation, connecting heaven and earth, that even the papyrus itself was likely some kind of training wheel to allow Joseph to understand from heaven what was God revealing to Father Abraham. Okay, to me, there are whole books written about translation issues in Joseph Smith. Okay, some fascinating things. But seeing what we see here in the Book of Mormon, oh, there's something worth wrestling with of what Ammon is telling King Limhi. Another verse worth mentioning here, by the way, is verse 17. I love this one. A seer, because that's what it's fascinating to Limhi. It's like, wait, a seer? What is that? How many E's does that word have? And he's trying to wrap his head around it. He has something he can look through. What? It's a gift from God, but only God lets you know who can use it and when they can use it. Those were lessons Joseph Smith himself had to learn, right? But as he's trying to wrap his head around what it means to be a seer, this is Ammon's definition of it, verse 17. A seer can know of things which are past, and also of things which are to come. Those historians can see past. Can they see future? I don't think so. But a seer can. By them shall all things be revealed, or rather, shall secret things be made manifest, and hidden things shall come to light, and things which are not known shall be made known by them. Also, things shall be made known by them which otherwise could not be known. I love that definition of a seer. It makes me all the more profoundly grateful for 15 prophet seers and revelators in our day. We will see this months from now in the book of Helaman. Nephi, the son of Helaman, is the best example I can think of a prophet who is portraying the principles of the Johari window. You might have to Google that. Johari is Johari. And the Johari window is this fascinating communications theory model. And in it, there's these 4 panes to the window. And what you're trying to decide is, what do I know and what do I not know, compared to what do others know and what do others not know. And if you combine those into 4 quadrants, you have this open pane of the window that I know it and so do other people. You have this other pane of the window where I know it, but other people don't know it. They call that the facade or the hidden area. Like, I don't want anybody to know. I'm aware of this. Nobody else is. Can we keep that secret? There's another pane of the window where they know it, but I don't know it. They call that the blind spot. It's like everybody's aware about this, except me. That's especially hard when it's about me. But it's in my blind spot, so I'm totally unaware. And then the 4th quadrant in this window is I don't know it, and nobody else knows it either. And so that's just the unknown. And again, we'll talk more about this and wrestle with it with Nephi's help when we get to Helaman later. But this verse by itself is the Johari window as well. Because if you think about, again, in communications theory, it's really helpful to bring as much to the open area as you possibly can. So in communications, I'm going to open up and divulge my hidden area. I'm going to come out from behind my facade so that you can help me. Okay, I'm bringing it out into the open. Meanwhile, and so there's my communication. How about your communication? Will you help me? Will you point out my blind spots in the kindest way as possible, please? But will you help me see what I'm not seeing? Because I can't change what I don't know about, and you can't help me with what you don't know about. So we're trying to move everything into that open area. The hardest part, by the way, is when it's in that completely lost quadrant of I don't know and you don't know. So we're all blind to that one. How can we ever get anything out of that area out into the open? Well, what amazes me about this verse is all those panes of the Johari window are present. Can we read it again, looking for it? A seer can know of things which are past and also of things which are to come. Past, well, that's probably common knowledge. Things to come, that's things we don't know yet. By them shall all things be revealed. So we're bringing everything into that first quadrant, up into the light. Secret things will be made manifest. Hidden things shall come to light. Are those the things that are secret because I'm keeping them secret from you? And yet a seer will out me in kind and compassionate ways, don't worry. But a seer will reveal what I'm not wanting people to know, or hidden things that are hidden to me, coaxing things out of my blind spot by crying repentance about sins I didn't even know that I was committing. And then when he goes on, these things which are not known shall be known. Okay? So again, things from both those other quadrants are moving into that top area. But then the last part, things which otherwise could not be known. I don't know it, you don't know it, nobody knows it. Not even the seer knows it until God reveals it through his gift and power. I'm so grateful for the power of prophets, seers, and revelators to bring everything into the light. That is light and truth, lux et veritas. That is lights and perfections, urim vatumim. That's a gift from God. And notice what Ammon says in verse 18 about those kinds of gifts. Thus God has provided means that man through faith might work mighty miracles. Therefore he becometh a great benefit to his fellow beings. And honestly, that's what spiritual gifts are all about. That's what they're for. He's given me means. Now the Urim and Thummim and the seer stone were actual physical, tangible means. Clay and spit and water, consecrated oil and laying on of hands and baptismal water and the temple garment and all these things. A wedding ring. It's just a training wheel to remind me of covenants I've made with my wife and covenants I've made with God. But means that he's given us, think about what consecration is all about. Our time, our talents, our means. What has God given me that I can give back to him and to my fellow brothers and sisters? The way that Ammon says it is so powerful. Here's the means and here's my faith. And when they come together and I put faith in whatever means God has given me, then all of a sudden mighty miracles can be worked for the benefit of others. I can become of benefit to my fellow beings. God has given me spiritual gifts. He's given me things that I can contribute to the cause. Ammon himself is a means that God is using to rescue Limhi and his people. The Urim and Thummim that King Mosiah has back in Zarahemla, there's a means whereby he can bless the world. What are your spiritual gifts? What are your talents? What time do you have? What means do you have? What can you contribute to the kingdom of God so that you, with the help of God and your faith in God, can become of great benefit to your fellow beings? We're in this thing together. I need you. I hope that what I am offering can be a blessing to you in return. And whatever means God has given me, an education, experiences, books to read, technology to be able to convey these kinds of things. I'm amazed at the goodness of people all around me that are contributing their means to make these things possible. There's so much work to be done in the kingdom. And with means and faith and a desire to consecrate, look out, world, will be a benefit to you. That's the hope. Well, Limhi responds to all of this in verse 20. He's just blown away by all of this. You're the gift God sent me. Your king is a gift God has sent me. Everything we've been wanting and hoping for is out there, and it's all come. And so he says in verse 20, oh, how marvelous are the works of the Lord. And marvelous as in they cause us to marvel. They're wonderful because they make us wonder about this. This is jaw-dropped incredible. How marvelous are his works. How long doth he suffer with the people? Yea, how blind and impenetrable are the understandings of the children of men. For they will not seek wisdom, neither do they desire that she should rule over them. Can you picture Limhi's humility with that statement? We have been blind, and there are real seers out there. We have been impenetrable, and yet God is trying to offer us his help. If we'll simply open ourselves to receive it. I worry sometimes about our so-called wisdom. I guess I should say our so-called intelligence, our information in this information age. And is it closing us off from the wisdom that God is willing to offer us through His wonderful, marvelous means? If we could have the humility to accept that God could use a humble seer and a simple seer stone, that He could work through means, and by small and simple means, great things can be brought to pass. Are we humble enough to accept that or not? Because chapter 9 and chapter 10 will let us know what happens when we lack that humility. For this, I'm going to try to be brief. Okay, we're about running out of time, and I keep pushing myself to try to keep it to an hour, and you know how hard it is for me. I'll keep trying. Okay, bear with me. But briefly, in chapter 9, a flashback begins. This flashback is going to last from chapter 9 all the way through chapter 22, and it's going to walk us through these three generations. We got to go back to Zeniff to see how we got ourselves into this mess. Then next week, we'll work through all of Noah, second generation, as far away in that far country as you can get. And then we'll catch back up to who we met today, Limhi, who's going to bring us back. Okay? So this is this giant flashback. And notice how it starts. Chapter 9, verse 1 is worth reading, because we get a sense of who Zeniff is and what got them into this Lamanite disaster. I, Zeniff, having been taught in all the language of the Nephites, so he's well educated, having had a knowledge of the land of Nephi, or the land of our fathers' first inheritance, so not only is he well educated, he's well traveled. It's like they're not even living there, but somehow he's gone back. He's aware. Has he studied it? What does he know about this? And then third, having been sent as a spy among the Lamanites, that I might spy out their forces, that our army might come upon them and destroy them. So not only is he well educated and well traveled, he's well positioned. A spy, a Nephite spy, going out to check out. I mean, he's in a position of power, of influence, and he's in a position where the Lamanites are the enemy, and I'm going to help take them down. Okay? But here's where it gets interesting. But when I saw that which was good among them, I was desirous that they should not be destroyed. Now, there are two very different ways we could take this. Is this a strength on Zeniff's part or a weakness? Because he's got both, as we all do. If this is a strength, then this is open-mindedness. This is generosity. This is, why are we going to destroy the Lamanites when they have so much of redeeming worth? Remember Jacob when he was telling the Nephites, you got problems. It's your racism that is blinding you to the benefits that you could gain if the Lamanites were allowed to become your teachers. They're better husbands than you are. They're better fathers than you are. There is family peace among the Lamanites where there is family friction here among the Nephites. They're better than we are at this. That was an incredibly positive thing that Jacob would say. And is it that positivity that is driving Zeniff here? Like, why would we destroy people that are better than us in certain areas? There are things that are good among them. The other possibility is this just rationalization. And that's something that we fall prey to at times, where this is something that needs to be eliminated from our lives, and yet it's like, there's some redeeming feature to it, and if I could just hold on to it, I know it's not exactly what I should be doing, but I'm seeing some benefit. I'm seeing some good, okay? Now, if it's rationalization on our part, we need to get past that, okay? But I want to wrestle with the other version, the other possibility. If this is true generosity on Zeniff's part, because I believe that's probably more accurate. There are good things about the Lamanites. So why would we destroy them? Now, for this, I want to first thank my brother-in-law. Alan, if you're out there, love you, brother. He's more of a brother than just a brother-in-law, but one of the great gifts of marrying his sister was inheriting him and the rest of the family. Alan's been working on a personal essay that I hope is going to end up being published in Wayfair. If you haven't seen Wayfair, by the way, my friends at Faith Matters, this is a masterpiece of a magazine with beautiful art and incredible poetry and inspiring essays. It's beautiful. It's not an academic journal. Don't get turned off by that thought. It is a beautiful literary magazine for Latter-day Saints and people of faith just to be inspired by. And Alan's been working on this incredible article and been going back and forth with the editors at Faith Matters to get it polished and ready. But he sent me an advanced copy because I knew he'd been working on it. And it's all about Zenith here in this moment. Because what Alan saw here, which I'm so grateful for, is there's a contrary that we've got to prove. Because what you see in this is picture how open-minded Zenith is. I'm supposed to be killing Lamanites, but there's something good here. Picture someone that is open-minded because they are educated, because they are well-traveled. They're kind of the intellectual elite. They're the kind of on the cutting edge of culture and society, and they are so open to what's outside because I'm at the edge of my group. Does that make sense? In some ways, he's going to come into loggerheads with this leader of the expedition. I mean, you're supposed to be a spy. You're supposed to be on our side. We're an army, and we're going to destroy those people. What are you thinking, Zenith? Finding some redeeming feature in the enemy? No, we are closed off to that. If we don't destroy them, they'll end up destroying us. And so you have two very different personalities in this same initial expedition, okay? In some ways, the best way to describe this in current terms would be conservatives and liberals. It would be Democrats and Republicans. And you have one side of the aisle that seems to be much more forward thinking, and others, I'm not going to say backwards, but conservatism is meant to hold on to kind of proven traditional values and to protect those things from enemies on the outside. Okay, there is purpose and meaning on both the conservative agenda and the liberal agenda. Okay, recently my daughter, who turned 18, was asking me what party I'm a part of, and I said, the fact you don't know is the best news ever, because my party is the proving of contraries. Okay, I see value on both sides of the line, and I'm constantly trying to balance the pros against the cons of both sides. I am a prover of contraries to the core. And what we're starting to see here is you have Zenith wanting to move forward and open doors and build bridges. And then you have this leader of the expedition, of the army, of the spies, that no, we've got to protect ourselves because there are reasons, there are walls between us. Now, do you see value and benefit on both sides? Do you see the need for some kind of compromise? In some ways, the overarching question here is, how open should we be to other points of view? They're worlds apart, conservatives and liberals, on this. There are those within the church that have a lot of holy envy for people outside. And then there are others that are hunkered down and it is one true church and we've got to protect ourselves, okay? And there's a history of being attacked by those of other faiths, and so I get that mentality as well. But notice this. In verse 2, Zenith admits, I contended with my brethren in the wilderness, for I would that our ruler, that is the other guy, should make a treaty with them. Now it's interesting. I don't want to fight the Lamanites, but I'm willing to fight my own people over this. I want to make a treaty with the Lamanites, but I can't somehow come to a compromise with my own people. There's problems on both sides, okay? Was Zenith pushing too hard, demanding his way be done? Meanwhile, the ruler of this group, is he pushing too hard in the other? Now, if I'm too strong on my side, how am I going to view the person on the other? Well, in an enemy kind of way. And sure enough, notice what Zenith says. He, this ruler of ours, was an austere and a bloodthirsty man. Way back in Omni chapter 1, verse 28, it adds that he was strong and mighty and stiff-necked. That sounds more like, well, I'm a good army general. Don't call me stiff-necked. I'm committed to the defense of my people. There are reasons we don't associate with the Lamanites. Again, we attack them because they are always attacking us. It's war here, okay? But is that being bloodthirsty on his part? Is that being austere on his part? Is that being stiff-necked? Well, keep reading. He commanded that I should be slain, Zeniff says. So there's an unbending dogmatism on his side and an unbending dogmatism on the other side. Okay, can you picture Congress here? Okay, can you picture perhaps some schisms within your own ward or stake with people on opposite sides of certain issues? Zeniff says, I was rescued by the shedding of much blood, for father fought against father, brother against brother, until the greater number of our army was destroyed in the wilderness, and we returned, those of us that were spared, to the land of Zarahemla, to relate the tale to their wives and their children, and talk about hard tales to tell. We destroyed each other, even before we met any Lamanites. Who's the real enemy? Those on the outside or fellow insiders that can't compromise or can't come to terms with how we're supposed to approach the outside? And I think in many ways we are beating each other up and beating ourselves up in the process. Even within the household of faith, we are not one heart and one mind, because one side of the church wants to dwell in righteousness and define themselves by moral issues, and the other side of the church wants to make sure there is no poor among us and defines themselves by social issues. And until we can become one heart, one mind on that and do both, live the vertical as well as the horizontal, then we'll never be Zion. Recently, I gave a whole presentation on this at BYU about orthodoxy, there's the vertical, and harmony, there's the horizontal. And the ruler of this expedition seems to be the vertical. The first great commandment, the orthodox. This is how we're supposed to do it. It's us against them. And they'll attack us, so we have to defend ourselves and take the fight to them. This is how things have to be. Meanwhile, Zeniff is the horizontal, the harmony. But there's good there. Why would we do? And those two cannot come to terms, and so they fight each other and destroy each other. And then have to come home and tell widows and orphans the sad news. Do you understand why we have to somehow work together to prove the contraries and understand? Was Zeniff pushing too hard in one direction while the ruler was pulling too hard back in the other? Let me give you some examples here. Are there differences between doves and hawks in Congress? Are there differences between bridge builders and watchers on the wall? And there's a wall they're watching for a reason. Is there a difference between diplomats and soldiers? And do we need the State Department and the Department of Defense? Second great commandment, first great commandment, orthodoxy, harmony, all of those kinds of examples. I wonder about those who prefer the sign on the chapel that says visitors welcome, and those who prefer the sign on the temple that says holiness to the Lord. And you have to have a recommend to prove that holiness. There's a reason for both. And we have to be able to prove the contraries and understand the difference between them, or we will end up tearing each other apart. To see Joseph Smith on one side wanting to move forward and open doors, and David Whitmer on the other wanting to hunker down and say, no, this is the way things have to be. Fast forward to see Brigham Young, more of the closed like the ruler, and Orson Pratt, more like the Zeniff, let's open things. It's fascinating. Even in Christ's original quorum of the 12 apostles, you got Simon the Zealot. We're not touching the enemy. We got to fight him and take him down. And then you have Matthew the publican. I think we can work with Rome. There's some things we should be doing here. And the fact the Lord chose them both. I have said this before, that creation, fall, atonement, those stages of faith, creation can't stand people in fall, and people in fall can't stand people in creation. Atonement's okay with everybody. Atonement understands the process. You're okay with wherever people happen to be, and you see that those two sides actually need each other. That's how we got to atonement. We proved the contraries of creation and fall. But creation is looking down their nose at people in the fall saying, come on, where's your faith? And people in fall are looking back at people in creation saying, come on, where's your brain? And that is Zeniff and this ruler to a T. The ruler is in creation stage. Like, there's boundaries for a reason. And this is the way things are supposed to be. We left the land of Nephi back in King Mosiah the First's day. Because we were led by God to do so, we trust in prophetic leadership. We wanted to hold to the faith and not let it be diluted by the problems that were taking place there. So we left for a reason. There's creation stage and the strengths of creation stage. Identity and protection and a sense of commitment and strength. And then you have Zenith in the fall stage, and not fall in a bad way, but fall in a good way of leaving the protection of Eden to be open to outside views, to see the good that is out there. Identity formation is incredible in creation stage, but working across the aisle is better done in fall stage. But does the fall stage react against the creation stage? So instead of correcting, they overcorrect. Are we back to Hansen's law? And this second generation is too far away from the first. We've got to balance them once we get to stage number 3. I hope this is making sense. I'm passionate about this stuff because not only do I see it in Scripture, I see it at church. And I see it in government. I see it in politics. I see it everywhere. And if we're going to continue to fight and tear each other apart because of creation and fall, because of Zenith and ruler, because of closed-mindedness in a good and bad way, and open-mindedness in a good and bad way, we have to be situation-specific. We have to be guided by the Holy Ghost. We have to find the intersection point, the crux of the cross, as we balance vertical with horizontal, or we'll never get to where we need to be. Notice the word in verse 3. Zenith admits, I being overzealous to inherit the land of our fathers. I collected as many as were desirous to go up to possess the land. I started again on our journey into the wilderness to go up to the land. And sure enough, we were smitten with famine and sore afflictions. We were slow to remember the Lord our God. Zenith admits it. It was my overzealousness. I had too much zeal because it seemed like the people back in Zarahemla didn't have enough. And so sadly, I overcorrected. And I pushed too hard. And when I got brought back, I just went straight back to where I started. No, I'm going to inherit the land. That's the right way. The Lamanites are good. And in fact, we're the bad guys. Do you start to see this? This open-mindedness to the other that morphs into a closed-mindedness to your own. I see that often with people that have left the church, where I'm open to everything except what I started with. They're the ones that are intolerant. They're the ones that are the problem. So I'm now intolerant of their intolerance. You understand? It's just really fascinating to see these two come at odds. And part of it was Zenith's overzealousness, and part of it was the ruler's inability to move and think outside the box. You with me? If so, the rest of this story can be summed up very, very quickly. Because Zenith and his overzealousness, I don't see any positives on that side, so I'm going to leave it all behind and swing the pendulum as far to the opposite side as I can. The Lamanites are not just good, they're better than those closed-minded Nephites back home. I'm open to them, and look, they're open to me. I just made this treaty. Hey, can we stay? And the king of the Lamanites was so much more open-minded than the king of the Nephites back home, because he cleared out all this space and said, sure, be my guest. You can have exactly what you were asking for. The land of Nephi is yours. And it's only later that Zenith realizes, I was blind to the kinds of problems that others were aware of. I mean, they were blind to the kinds of goodness that I saw, but I was blind to the problems. And there's pros and cons to both. The reason the king of the Lamanites opened up this space for us was to take us into bondage. And here we are. That's going to last 3 generations because I wanted it so bad. I wanted to prove myself right. All this confirmation bias to get me in that direction. And now we're stuck. And we've been fighting for our freedom ever since. That is what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, especially 2 weeks from now. But to see what Zenith admits, that's what you'll see by the end of chapter 9. And then, like I said, chapter 10 I can do in 2 words. Because in this chapter, they're trying to make sense of, why do the Lamanites hate us so much? We saw good in them. Why don't they see any good in us? Why did they trick us into putting us in bondage, and now they'll never free us? And what are we supposed to do? And in chapter 10, it reveals what the Lamanites had against the Nephites all along. Here's the two words: wronged and wrath. As you study chapter 10 on your own, look for those two words. They explain everything. What did the Lamanites have against the Nephites? You've wronged us from the beginning. Nephi wronged us by taking over the reins of control of the family. Laman's the oldest son. Nephi was number 4. He had no reason to rule or teach. And so we were wronged. We were wronged on the boat. We were wronged in the promised land when Nephi took off with the Liahona, with the sword of Laban, with leadership of his little sub-tribe. He was the one that left us. It was his civil war. And think about this, because the Lamanites felt this victim mentality, and we were wronged, we were wronged, we were wronged. I think they said it 3 times. And then as a result of those 3 wrongs, there's, I think, 4 wraths. Because we were wronged, I'm wroth. I'm angry. And there's nothing quite like pulling the victim card to get you up in arms, literally or emotionally, against the person that wronged you. And so no wonder for all these centuries past, Lamanites have been teaching their children to hate Nephites to the point that theirs is an eternal hatred. Those are all phrases from chapter 10. You'll see them when you look. If I'm a victim, if other people have wronged me, and I'm mad about it, and I'm going to raise my children with that degree of anger, good luck finding solutions for that. Because the children don't call it anger. They call it justified righteous indignation. We're the innocent ones here. And so if these Lamanites have felt innocent the whole time, meanwhile, what are Nephites doing? Raising their children on innocence as well, their own self-innocence, because it's the Lamanites that are filthy. It's the Lamanites that are bloodthirsty and idolatrous and idle and all of these things. It's 2 groups telling stories about the other. And those stories are filled with wrong and filled with wrath. No wonder they harden into prejudice, where you cannot see anything positive in the other side. No wonder if you're raised with that intensity, that when the next generation actually has the courage to look and see and meet someone on the other side, no wonder they overcorrect. You were too far on one side, they're going to end up being too far on the other. That's the way things work. I worry, by the way, if we've been telling stories about outsiders that make it incredibly hard to ever build a bridge later on. If we're setting up the next generation for the opposite failure of our failure, and just crossing our fingers that hopefully some generation figures it out, balances things. Can we get past our victim mentality? Can we open ourselves in the right amount while still holding on to the truths we've been given in the right amount, so we can move forward and build bridges, have semi-permeable membranes, have walls and doors, identity as well as openness, orthodoxy and harmony, all of these contraries that we've got to prove. I pray we'll be able to do a better job of that. Because if we don't, guess what happens? Well, come next week and you'll see. The way Zeniff ends chapter 10 of his record, he's about to die, so he says, I gave the reins of the kingdom down to one of my sons. And as we'll see next week, that son was named Noah. The fact that it was one of Zeniff's sons, I'm like, whoa, you had other options and you went with Noah? What were you thinking? Yikes. And yet I also wonder, does an overzealous dad like Zeniff end up raising a little hellion like Noah will be? Is he overswinging the pendulum to compensate for what Dad did in the past? Or can we balance things the way the Lord would have us do? My friends, what we've studied this week, I hope will help us navigate things in a more healthy way. I hope they will give us hope for people returning to faith and us having the courage to go out and help them come back. I hope we will see what seers have to offer. And I hope we can prove the contraries on opposite sides of the aisle so that we can move forward in a healthy way. Let me give you a quick summary, our list of one-liners, and then we'll call it a day and come and see you again next week. But these are some amazing statements from what we've read this week. Desirous to know concerning the people, to inquire concerning their brethren. I desire to know the cause. I will endeavor to speak with boldness. If ye had known me, lift up your heads and be comforted. I trust there remaineth an effectual struggle to be made. Put your trust in God. How great reason we have to mourn, and all because of iniquity. Who wondereth that they are in bondage? The promise of the Lord is fulfilled. He will, according to his own will and pleasure, deliver you. Appeal unto our brethren to deliver us out of bondage. They were lost in the wilderness, yet they were diligent, desirous to know the cause of their destruction. He has wherewith that he can look. A gift which is greater can no man have. Secret things shall be made manifest, and hidden things shall come to light. Things shall be made known by them which otherwise could not be known. God has provided a means that man, through faith, might work mighty miracles. How long doth he suffer with his people? They will not seek wisdom, neither do they desire that she should rule over them. Slow to remember the Lord our God. In the strength of the Lord did we go forth to battle, awakened to a remembrance of the deliverance of our fathers. Possess the land in peace, an eternal hatred, fair promises. Now take any of those phrases, wrestle with them, study them, ponder them, and teach them to each other. There is incredible truth here. My friends, I am so grateful for the relevance of the Book of Mormon. And even in these flyover chapters that we tend to skip between Benjamin and Abinadi, I hope you have seen yourself. I hope you've seen your loved ones. I hope you see some marching orders moving forward, that if we can balance in the right way, we'll be able to establish Zion. That's been the hope from the very beginning, and that's our plan moving forward.
Thanks so much for listening to Unshaken, a proud member of the Faith Matters Podcast Network. You can learn more about Faith Matters and check out our other shows at faithmatters.org.